Mr. Bernstein, take it away.
Hey, it is somehow already Sunday, May 18th. This is Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and we will have, I think, sometime next week, a freestanding video of the talk I was hoping to give last week on amiability in the web, which foundered under a sea of technical problems. Uh, but without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. What we do in the meetups is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves, if they so choose or desire to do so. We then would jump into any particular project or idea that people are working on. Chuck and I have been bouncing quite a few around, and then we would jump into a theme, which we don't have this week. Well, let's just go right into it. I don't see anybody new. So what projects is everybody working on, and what's on your Tinderbox personal knowledge management thought process today? Who's got something going on? Bill, haven't seen you in a while. What have you been up to? You're on mute.
Yeah. I've just basically been busy on weekends. Um, but one of the things that's slowly going on, it's sort of related to Tinderbox, but not. I want to be in a position to write. And I've wanted to use um, being able to get to PDFs or to HTML, which is still very new to me, um, and trying to install um, Quarto and Python and things. I need to make graphs as well as write. It's been a challenge. I try to install Jupyter Lab, and when I install Python, it doesn't work on Mac OS 15.4 because a program called NumPy doesn't work. There are all these little hassles that a newbie has. I finally used Anaconda to get everything installed. And I have a system in place now that has Julia for making graphs and Quarto for making words and things. And my starting place is gonna be Tinderbox, but I haven't had a major project to write yet. So I'm just in the process of setting stuff up, and it's been really hard, just with programming because everything I touch at first time doesn't work, which I think is a standard for programming. Uh, but it's just if you don't know it, it's hard to get in.
Bill, if it helps, I just launched and I'll drop it in the chat, my Tinderbox to PDF module. And you could see something like that. That something like that could be helpful for you. Just to learn how the pieces could come together.
Yeah, something that also I've been thinking, I've been using Tinderbox compared to everything that goes on in the forums. I'm very simple with it. And I don't have a need, just a notebook. And so it doesn't have all these sophistications that talk about in the forum, like collecting all these attributes or whatever, and these various, that's coding too. Um, um, I don't need it. I'm content using it in my more simplistic way at the moment. So
Perfect.
it's just a thought I've had.
And would you mind dropping into the chat for us, just so we can keep track of any links you might have to the different apps you refer to?
Yeah, I'll just mention them in a chat.
Awesome.
Yeah. Bill, a tangent, if I can get this in before my internet goes bluey. Uh, last week ago or so at the Sydney conference, the president of the ACM had it thinks I'm done talking. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Okay, great. Um, President of the ACM had a slide about the reproducibility crisis and how difficult it is to reproduce results. And like leading the reproducibility crisis was chemistry, in which about 80% of chemists report having encountered an unreproducible result. And I thought to myself, Whoa, that's very unjust.
Michael went
No,
out.
no.
I mean, Mark went out.
Yeah, Mark
But
went out.
as he did, is maybe he can hear us, but this directly applies to me. Um, I I have a I produced superconductivity at room temperature and normal pressure, not room temperature, but close. I can't reproduce it, and I can't publish because of that. It's it's a very big deal, and I can't publish because I can't reproduce.
Yeah, but aside from that, it's a very common experience to go and make some compound that you want, and you go to the paper that first synthesized it, and you say, "Oh, that looks easy." Get to the end of the 3 or 4 days, and whatever you have is not what you were supposed to have. And that isn't remarkable or bad science. That's you were sloppy. You cooked it too little or too much, or some air got into the manifold, or the other fellow had some bit of catalyst that you didn't have lying around the lab. Uh, I mean, I was not a good bench chemist, but I certainly didn't think it was remarkable when things don't turn out. And this is what triggered me when you said we're talking about how things in programming don't work the first time. And I said, but of course they don't work the first time. If they did work the first time or even the second time, we'd be a lot further along in this business than we are. But there is something profound. I mean, Chuck may disagree with me, for example, but nothing works the first time.
Oh no, I don't disagree with you at all on that.
Or even if it does work the first time, you need to test. Is it a fluke?
Right.
Right. If you think it worked the first time, you're probably mistaken.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's always a wow, how did that happen whenever it does? You know, the first time, well, must have done something strange there. I was just going to comment on Bill's points about, getting some of the Jupyter and related tools going. I've just actually been doing some of that myself. I'm um, been meaning for quite some time to set myself up to start doing some serious data analysis. And I'm going down the Python path for coding and decided to go with Jupyter Lab, Jupyter Notebooks. Um, but to give an example of what I do and what may have helped me somewhat with this was that I do a lot of background research before I jump into something. And one of the things that I discovered, which does not get as much attention as perhaps it deserves, is Jupyter Desktop. And Jupyter Desktop actually gives you a very reproducible process for getting Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Labs, and the Python, IPython installation all correct in one go. So it's one application, the same as any other Mac OS application for either the Intel or the ARM variant. And it takes care of all the messiness and gives you a working version. And I think that's part of what the industry has been poor at, is pulling together a complete package in a manner that people can reproducibly install it. And it often isn't there. But one of the first things I do is to go looking for, is there such a thing? Or is there somebody who has really written a good cookbook for how to do it? And, that bit of upfront research has saved me countless hours in a lot of other situations. And when I haven't had it, it's resulted in a huge waste of time. So, I absolutely understand it. There's nobody who can avoid these kinds of problems if you're working with the current technology, and there is a lot of sloppiness out there because people just get things up to the point where they get it working and they don't bother with the documentation, or they toss it off to somebody else, or
and that's
whatever.
the way it's been for the last 40 years.
Absolutely. Longer than that, actually.
Well, yes, indeed.
I back in my youth, when I was working in university research, this is the early 70s. mid 70s. And, computers were really hard to come by. And because we were doing university research, we had access to government surplus. We actually managed to pick up a GE 235 computer. This is a small mainframe. And we got it from a military research lab. And it was multiple cabinets, extremely well built. But the thing that blew my mind at that time was we also got all the documentation. Every single circuit. I mean, this is before integrated circuits, guys. Every single circuit was documented. The core memory was laid out. All the programming was laid out. The detail that was provided in the way of documentation. And to this day, I've never seen anything to that level of capability. We just don't do the documentation anymore. And as a result, huge amount of wasted effort and time goes into people trying to figure out how to reproduce something which should be absolutely reproducible, but isn't because it's not documented. Hence, the importance of paying attention to Tinderbox, because it's a tool everybody should be using a lot more of.
Absolutely. Okay. Anybody else? Thoughts, ideas, comments?
Mr. Anderson.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Right, let's starting afresh. Put my hand down. I was going to report on something I'm doing, but a couple of things is one issue. The reproducibility thing is interesting. I put a link into in the side thing to a thing called FAIR, which is frankly a self-licking ice cream. It's a bit like worrying about climate change. There's a difference between worrying about it and doing something about it. So FAIR has lit up the world. Everyone wants to be FAIR compliant, but the R in that is reproducibility, and it's in the physical sciences, it's concern. I'm not sure if I'm honest, I shouldn't say this because I'm part of the project, but because everyone's fiddling around the edges and not doing the big stuff, I don't know whether it'll come to pass, but it should be the case, given that so much research is publicly funded. So we, the taxpayer, own it. So frankly, we should be getting some bangs for our buck, and we aren't. So my understanding, I'm not a chemist, but I'm working with lots of chemists at the moment. That is one of the problems, that everyone thinks they're sitting on top of some multi-million-dollar winning patent, if only they know which one of the things they're working on is that, which is a wrong view to take if you're working in publicly funded money. Absolutely fine that people should profit from their work, but boy is the whole thing bent out of shape. And of course, massive overproduction, the publish or die syndrome, doesn't help. I also, on the Jupyter side, if you are at all familiar with Python, which if you don't know Python, you probably don't know R, so this is meaningless. But there is a language called R, which is a sort of scripting language that I think was essentially the open source alternative to what became SPSS, which was sort of available for a while. Then IBM bought it. Now no one can afford it. And R has various tools like R Book Down and R Blog Down. So the idea is that essentially you can write a book and have lots of code in it and have it interactive, or well, either you can just make literally a book, whether it's an ebook or a physical book, but potentially you could write something that sits on top of data, and if you look at it in a dynamic environment like a browser, there are libraries like R Shiny, and in mentioning these, don't assume I know how these work. I'm just aware of them, but in principle, you could write something. And so you can have sort of dynamic graphs, you can have dynamic presentation, you can begin to do the same sort of dynamic representation of information that is essentially being addressed in Tinderbox by posters. So is it worth building everything as a native view? Probably not in engineering cost terms, but it turns out browsers in 2025 do a lot more than they did in 1995, and we sort of forget that. So there is a nice catch up there. So think of those tools. And on the thing of saying, are you doing anything? Embarrassing, about 10 years ago, I promised my supervisor I would write up one of my bits of thesis research as a paper. So I'm back working on a longitudinal history of bots in Wikipedia, which is interesting because it doesn't matter which axis of observation you look, nothing is consistent, as you would expect from a human-built system that is mainly run about humans and not done as an engineering result. It's interesting because every time I see a paper where people said, we just took the X from Wikipedia, and I get crinkly around the edges. I don't think you understand. It's not that simple. Someone kindly pointed out to me that the one thing you should understand working with Wikipedia is no two queries you ever ask of it will be the same, and they weren't joking, and that is true. It doesn't devalue the resource that Wikipedia is at all, but it means you need to be a bit more insightful when you look at stuff. So that's been interesting, and I'm back doing it again as I did before in Tinderbox because I would struggle to use anything else. The reason being that because you're doing exploratory work, most systems require you to formalize what you're going to do before you start. And the joy of using a tool like Tinderbox, not to be exclusive, is the ability to delve into the subject and realize after a while, right, there's an extra bit I need to build in here. And whether it's a sort of do-over or even just an adjustment to what you're doing, that is fantastically powerful. You don't have to waste time making bad decisions early on before you know what you're doing. So I'm for once, I'm actually back in the work trenches. Just thank you.
I always like your quotes. Don't waste time making bad decisions. What? You're on mute.
Sorry,
what did you
no.
say?
Well, no. Well, it was really interesting. I mean, I sort of returned to study in my back into my 50s. I very rusty botany degree moons and moons ago, and I was just staggered about how people talked about process. Do you have a methodology? And I'm thinking, have you ever stepped outside these hallowed portals and seen the world outside? The reality is you can't always guess what you're going to do. And in the end, my supervisor gave up and said, look, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm pretty happy you're going to get there, which was kind. But I did think I watched some of my colleagues go through absolute sheer hell because they would massively commit to a process they didn't fully understand, that it turned out was totally wrong for what they were looking at. So the idea that you look at something and sort of take a reflection on what you're doing and readjust and move forward, which in an operational environment, which is what I'm more used to, is absolutely the meat and bread of everyday work, seemed alien to the academic process. There's no right or wrong in that, but it's something that I think is much overlooked. And so avoiding rushing to structure before you need to is a good thing. And that loops around to the point we've discussed before. If your data looks messy in your map or wherever, that's probably a good thing. That means that you haven't rushed to ram it into a template, which wouldn't fit it anyway. And you're still getting useful stuff out of it.
Fantastic. All right. Who else has any other thoughts, comments, questions, observations? If not, maybe Chuck, you can guide us on some of your thoughts around the importance of consistency of the installation process, and we can have a dialogue around that. You're on mute.
Well,
okay.
yeah, no, I just
As he takes a deep breath, do we really want to get into that right now?
I don't know how long my voice is going to last, actually. But I think, one of the things that I was just chatting with Michael about is as we look at trying to merge our own work with work that we get from other people, I've been working on something that I'm calling package management, and that I hope to be sharing with everybody soon. But there are a series of issues we run into. One is just commonality of approach. If everybody does everything in a different way, then the potential for integrating work from multiple sources into Tinderbox documents that we can actually use would become probably too convoluted to really work correctly. So approach is one part of it, getting consistency of approach. And the other thing is, if you're going to develop things that you're going to share with other people, there's also going to be the need to update them. And so how do you go through an update process, and how do you do that in a way that's rational? And the first principle has to be non-destructive, but yet you also want to get as close as possible to making an update that will actually work and get the right things done. And that's going to take a lot of thought and effort. And then beyond that is a much more complex topic of versioning. And all of those are challenging. I think we're between the work that Michael, Mark Anderson, and I have been doing recently, I think we're getting close on being able to address some of the package management issues and making that a viable platform, if you will, for beginning to integrate more useful applications or applets into Tinderbox in a way that's rational. It's going to just take community effort to try these things out. I mean, just people using some of these techniques as they become available and providing feedback will be important to actually getting it to the point where it's viable and really works well. But it's going to be a bit of a journey getting there. I think Tinderbox is a useful enough platform that it's worth trying to go down this path. And I think that we've got enough evidence that it's doable that I think there's going to be some promise here. So that's sort of the gist of what I was talking about. We can dive into any of these topics, but they get fairly deep fairly quickly. So whether or not my voice will last long enough to do that, I can't tell you right now. I'm in the final stages of recovery from COVID. My first case of COVID. So
Really?
Yeah.
Good for lucky you.
I've managed to avoid it all this time. And I actually probably got it from my doctor because I had a physical on Monday and he was coughing. So anyway.
All right. So yeah, and I for one have been interestingly enough, so I've built about 5 different modules in my publishing system. And to your point, I've been using eating my own dog food, if you will, on this. And so it's been installing my modules on top of each other and then finding those inconsistencies. And it's a lot of work. A little name tweak there, a little revision version control here, and it's quite a bit to try to juggle. Not when you're not a professional programmer and you don't have the tools necessarily to effectively manage that or know how to manage that. Mr. Bruce, you've got a comment?
Well, sort of a question. I'm wondering from Chuck or others, Chuck, if your voice is not there, and my sympathies on COVID. Yeah, I got my first one 3 days before I was having 40 families start our summer program a couple years ago. So that threw a little monkey wrench in. When you talk about installations, and I've been following this conversation, obviously I'm on the low end of the programming knowledge, but I've heard of Python and R and the others. What is the end goal here for these installation packages? What if everything works the way you and others expect? What benefit will people see?
Okay, so let me start with an individual first. So many of us, develop Tinderbox documents for working on the knowledge that we're currently interested in. We're curating knowledge. We're writing things down. We're collecting notes. And invariably, people start to accumulate pieces that when they go and start a new project, they'd like to carry those pieces with them into a new Tinderbox document. So it could be user attributes. it could be prototypes, templates, taggers, highlighters, the whole potpourri of
Mhm.
facilitations that Tinderbox provides. And it would be nice if you could package that up in a way that you could just then plant it into a new document and have all of that be there for you, be there in the way you would like to have it. That's kind of a first
That 'cause
step.
I go from project to project, and that is always that's always my struggle. I'm starting off at
Okay.
scratch and remembering and having them side by side to make sure that I match up the attributes and everything else.
Right.
And Bruce, if it's helpful, I can show you an example of exactly what we're talking about if you'd like to see it. Just
Let me just follow through
Well, not
on
at the,
Yeah.
if it's okay, I'd kind of like to hear Chuck's complete
yeah, of
statement
course.
first.
That's why I waited to jump in.
Sure.
So I was just describing how an individual might want this. But the next thing that's going to happen is you work on a new project and you make some further improvements to the way you do things. You add some more user attributes. You put in some new prototypes. You do a few other things. You say, gee, I'd like to be able to do that again in another document. Or I've got to go back to that prior project. And I'd like to be able to bring over the things that I had for the previous project. And that's where, again, if we had a standard way of sort of wrapping the stuff up into a package and then updating into another Tinderbox document in a rational way, that becomes an attractive capability so that you can bring newer stuff into a prior document and have things update rationally. And that's where I got into the first priority is non-destructively. So you could have, for example, a prototype, and you could say, if this prototype have logic that says, if this prototype has a modified date greater than the current prototype in the target document, then replace the current prototype because this is a newer version. But you don't want that to be thrown away, so you move it somewhere else into, let's say, a discard container, and you make all the updates. Now then, if somebody later discovers, well, that didn't work the way I wanted it to, they'd still be able to get to the prior version of it and manipulate, put it back where it was. So, but that in and of itself begins to refine the way that a user would work with their own tool set, if you will. So they can keep evolving it as they work on various projects and yet be able to move things backwards and forwards in terms of older projects and newer projects. And then the next step beyond that is somebody develops an application. In my case, the one that I spent a lot of time on is this diagram view, which is about to come out with a whole raft of very significant enhancements. But in doing that, you want to be able to have that applet, if you will, be able to be added to someone's existing document without causing any problems, just adding a set of capabilities. Michael has got a whole bunch of tools and capabilities that he uses. His set of templates is just invaluable. And having that be something that you can integrate into an existing document, the stuff you've already been working with, would be useful. But this gets into this issue of needing to have some consistency of approach. And that's, again, part of what we've been looking at is how do we make this a consistent approach so that different people can develop different applets for Tinderbox and have them merge and come together without tripping over each other. And that's going to take some further work to get all the details straightened out. But I think we're onto a path that will get us there. Beyond that, it's looking at now then, all right, so I put out an updated version of the diagram view. Somebody else started using it and they'd like to add my enhancements to what they've already got. So I've thought about how to do package management in a way that I can give them a new version of the diagram view and have it automatically update what's already there. Again, in a non-destructive manner. Because there will be further updates in the future. I'm not through with it yet. And people might like those enhancements. So again, we're trying to set things up so that we can promulgate updates and have them install in a rational way with zero effort on the part of the user. And when I say zero effort, I mean, I've literally, well, Michael's got this as well, but literally you just do one copy and paste and everything gets updated automatically. It's a convoluted process. It's got a lot of complexities associated with it. But I think we're getting close to having something that is reproducible and effective. And in the coming couple of weeks, I hope this will become something that gets shared out more broadly, and people can take a look at it and start trying to use it. And the intent is to not just be a package management system for somebody developing an application, but to have it be a package management system that anybody could use to bundle up the things they want in their Tinderbox documents in a way that they can then just keep adding them back in. That's the goal. That's the objective. I hope that's helpful.
It's fascinating. You've taken me back to 1969, and it's June 25th, and we're all waiting for the first man to land on the moon. So
that's a bit dramatic.
Well, it's funny, and Mark B, I kind of wonder, as you're sitting here watching what your children are up to, I just kind of wonder what goes on in your head as you're watching all this.
I can't hear you, Mark.
This is the way it's supposed to be.
Nice.
So, Chuck, as you were speaking, a few things came to mind that I think that I want to talk to you about. So one is a general mechanic. So when we move things to and what do you call it? An archive folder. I don't want to call it trash because it's not trash. It's backup archive.
I call it I just call it the discard.
Okay, discard. Okay.
Right now.
All right. Well, so we move things to this discard container. Do we also want to set the do not export I don't remember the attribute, but the is searchable to false, so that the item that discarded item can't be part of the search criteria. Maybe you lock it, and because all of that is because when it comes to then running action code, and then I would think you'd want to put the discard at the very bottom of the hierarchy, like the last item in the hierarchy, so it doesn't end up screwing up any kind of templates or things that Tinderbox is looking for.
So that's a little bit of the magic of all of this, is that some of the infrastructure, if you will, that comes along with this to get the approach consistent, is that the stuff that's related to managing packages and keeping the global settings that different packages need, and various other unsundry pieces that are essential. All of that's stuck into a container that is always the last top level container. And the last thing in that container is the discards container. So it is absolutely always at the bottom. And the idea is that once you've done an update, you've put new stuff in, if everything is working correctly, you can just toss the entire discards container. It's no longer needed.
Right.
But then if something does break, if something doesn't work right, or you realize, gee, I had a variant on that prototype that I would like to put back in that somehow didn't get caught by the way the update process worked, then that would be the kind of thing you could go in and you could pull it back and or compare two things and figure out what you want to fix. In most cases, the idea is that if you're doing that with your own stuff, it's probably going to be important to do that kind of checking. If you're doing it with, an applet, a package that somebody else has developed and that is consistent with the system, in general, you're probably not going to be worried about it because you won't be modifying what was provided there. And so you won't have a problem with tripping over yourself. But the idea is, again, to support both shared applications as well as personal tool sets that you want to replicate and pass through. And again,
Yeah.
there's a lot of programming logic in this. You can't avoid it, but we can set it up so that you don't have to know how all that works to be able to just configure a package that then does what you want it to do. That's the game plan. As I said, it's going to take some work to get it all straightened out, but
yeah. I was thinking, I was walking the dogs this morning, and when you mentioned the term programming logic, and maybe Mark Bernstein, you can comment on this as well. Programming logic's not just about writing the code. Programming logic actually, the code writing part is actually just a small part, I would think, of the concept of programming logic. It's how it's where you put things, how you organize things, the timing of things. All of that logic needs to be worked out kind of before you and as you're writing the code, no?
absolutely. What's the structure? I tend to
Can you
refer to it as infrastructure.
Mr. Bernstein, do you have thoughts on that? Like, how would we best understand the idea of programming logic?
Programming is just like other kinds of writing, and part of it involves tinkering with the words and choosing the right words, and part of it involves figuring out what the global structure of the piece may be and experimentally moving things around.
Interesting.
And
Think
no,
of it
I
as the
have not
difference between
switched to a new language. Good grief. This thing keeps asking me questions, but at least it's not dropping out again.
in a sense, there's a difference between what you write down and the organization of that writing. And Michael, as you've demonstrated so effectively, you can write a lot of things down and then have different structural ways to represent that in different formats. And that's what I tend to think of as being the structure. That you've got a lot of material, a lot of logic that works, but it only works within a structure that makes sense. You could have a lot of notes written down, but you just printed all those notes out and handed them to somebody, it probably is not going to be very useful until those notes get organized into some manner that shows a flow, shows a consistency, and moves from point A to point B.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. There's a lot more thought needs to be put to that for sure. Anybody want to respond to Bruce's comment? Mark? In the
Well,
chat?
I was just typing something. My immediate response is something that says, "You've just sawn off the branch you're sitting on. Did you mean to do this?" The hard part is for the application, poor thing, to know after we've done something stupid that we didn't mean to do, but we did. Catching sufficient of the sort of rubble that emerges before it's lost to us, and doing the right thing. So I wonder if my pause was thinking, I don't think there is a way to say there isn't something that says sort of this is not deletable, or ask me before you delete it, which I think gets to the question you're asking. But that's probably
Mark, can you hear me? Let me try and clarify what was going on. It's not anything I want all the time, God forbid. But I'm going through this lengthy pretend report. And the reason I call it a pretend report, it was an evaluation of a 2.5-year-old where the psychologist never saw the child. So it makes it a little hard. And they wrote something I've never seen in my life. Under prognosis, they wrote, the mother thinks the prognosis is not very good. They didn't give their own opinion. So I can't wait to get this one to court. So I'm going through this litany of symptoms, and I'm in that zone, if you will, where I'm doing Zettelkasten note after Zettelkasten note. And all of a sudden, for some very similar symptoms, I wasn't sure if I had accidentally deleted one because I made a mistake. And so my point is, it's something I'd love to be able to turn on, via a Boolean switch for, say, a particular node. I've got a particular parent-child string going under symptoms, and it's within that vein that I might like to be able to have this, did you mean to?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll probably refer to Mark in a second, but simply to round this out, yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not something it would be ridiculous to have it on all the time, because that would become the "where's the thing I had in my hand yesterday" function, and we know that's rather hard to do. But within that scope, certainly one of the practical things I do at the moment is when I'm working on something where essentially I know there are a set of notes, and I know that I'm doing things where it's entirely likely that I will either delete a note or I will change an attribute, often by resetting it. One of the things I often do is just show myself a count somewhere. I'll have a note that's just showing me, you've got X of these and Y of those. And if X and Y changes, then it's my warning. You need to backtrack fast, because you did something you didn't mean to do, and you're still in the window where it's possible to find that. It's not the direct answer to what you've said in a finite way, but it's one thing you can possibly do at the
But I
thing. So,
could have,
if you're tracking, say, you've got 40 case reports that are part of this thing, and you suddenly find you've got 38 or 39. That's a wake-up call that perhaps stop what you're doing, go back and find out how you came to have less than you imagined. But I suspect Mark will have a much more eloquent
He's
answer.
actually got one in the chat, and let me demonstrate it for you real quick. So what you could do, Bruce, is you have a container called Note One, and you put a show, are you sure you want to delete, plus a name. So when I delete, and I'll do this again in a minute, but let me just show you. So if I go in here and I delete Node A, and let me do it again. If I delete Node A, it says, are you sure you want to delete Node A? And you're like, no, I don't. And you hit undo. And so you put Node A back. And so the answer is in the containers on remove, you put a show and say, are you sure you want to delete this, plus the name.
so just to be sure that I follow. So, okay, I see the little bit of, code, and that's going under, okay, remove is the container you put it in.
Yeah. So note one is the container I'm in, and here's A and B inside Note One's container, and the remove tab here is actually the attributes on remove.
Okay.
So the attribute on remove is a attribute that allows you to trigger expression upon an action, and the action is I'm removing something from this container.
That would do it. I have to share with you, my new setup is a Mac Pro 14-inch that I've had for 5 months, but then I went and bought a new Mac Pro, the M4 13-inch. And
Yeah.
I have to tell you, putting those side by side and being able to move Tinderbox over onto the iPad Pro, and then working with my two document screens, just gives me such a wonderful work environment. Somehow it's better and more effective than having two screens in front of me. Uh, and so I'm just finding that sometimes when I'm working, I'm moving along pretty quickly, and that's when this happened yesterday.
Yeah, so that's how you do it temporarily. So if you have a project, and then Mark B, I guess I noticed it only works for the on remove is just for the children, not for descendants, correct? So you'd have to
That's right.
set up you'd set some kind of prototype up.
Okay. Another approach is the dashboard approach. You put some enunciator where you're not going to miss it, that says, hey, you have 40 of these major topics. And if that ever goes to 39,
Right.
you presume that you have done something bad. That at least tells you that there's a missing topic.
And setting up so the enunciator would just be a separate note. Is that how
Yeah,
that would?
well, you're going to have an agent somewhere that's finding the topics in the most general case where they're not all in the same. My first solution assumed they're all in the same container. But if they're scattered through the document and they're the opinions of Dr. Baxter, then you can find it in the attributes or in the text. And there were 40 of those originally. And if that changes, you know something has gone wrong.
Right. Well, I'll play around with both of those. I'm starting to embed a little bit more code into my Tinderbox, which for me is is a major step forward. And so I'll do that, and I'll use the forum. Thank you.
So Bruce, I just put up something in the chat, but that's literally a screen grab. But I mean, it's nothing complicated, and it's something that people do a lot of for other reasons. But just earlier today, one of those tailbacks in that screen grab told me I'd inadvertently, well, two things. One, it told me I deleted a thing, and it also turned out that I had a note that started with AA, which was perfectly valid in the way it's used, but it turns out that English Sort, I think, treats that as a proxy for some kind of foreign accent and sorts it after Z. So I couldn't find this note until I did a find and find that, lo and behold, it had gone all the way to the end. Now, let's not go down the rabbit hole of why that arises, but the whole point is that just having that little tailback saved a lot. I do recall another approach that was discussed in the past was essentially teaching yourself to not delete anything, but put it in essentially in a trash can. The problem there is we never make mistakes. So of course you would never use the delete button and delete a note. You will put, the thing you meant to delete in a sense your bin container. So I think that's a fragile approach. Obviously, if it's something, some people manage to work with that. I think it's got probably a high hurdle for most of us, because once the muscle memory is there, you just hit the backspace key and it's gone, and then it's too late to get it back. But I do think simple counts. You can put them any way you like. So we've just seen several things. You can put them as a display expression. You can put them in a dashboard. You can have a sort of show function that's keeping an eye on that and giving you a tailback. The thing is, there's a degree of human fallibility, because of course a dialogue pops up in your application, says, do you wish to do this? Yes, no. And you want to get to the next thing, so you mash the yes button when of course you meant to press the no. So it's actually remarkably difficult. The weakness in the system tends to be the human rather than the software.
This is helpful, and it's really something, I mean, the other solution is slow down, Bruce. That is an obvious one, but it just made me think about it.
Can I give you one other solution that has saved me countless times? You run an application like Arc Backup, ARQ, and it's constant, or a similar kind of backup to Google Drive, but I don't find Google Drive that reliable in this context, especially for files like Tinderbox. And so if you've deleted something, and I have Arc running a backup like every 30 minutes on my files. So if you've deleted something, your only risk is that 30-minute window, and you can go back and recover and download from a previous backup in the last 24 hours or last week. And then that way you've kind of always, and I only keep like a month's worth of archives. So every half an hour over the 24 hours, every 24 hours, every day over the last week, and then it starts deleting after the last month. And then that way, when you make those kinds of mistakes, you can recover yourself pretty easily.
But Tinderbox already has that built in.
I find they built in Tinderbox, it does. And so the other thing is revert to. I don't know if you've ever tried that, Bruce. Let me show you.
I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, so but for those that are watching the video and may not know,
sure.
Under Tinderbox, if you need to recover something, you can go to revert to, and it would revert to previous versions. I haven't saved this file, so there isn't previous versions yet. And that can recover it. I find that 90% of the time, though, once I revert to Tinderbox, it does capture what I want, but then Tinderbox crashes or something happens. So I don't know what I don't know. I find that not as reliable as something like Arc.
What I do as an alternative to either of those, and there might be some downsides to it, but when I have a large project, I usually just version it myself and I just put a V1, V2 after, and every so often, yeah, I'll do a save as and just create a new incremental version of it manually.
Does
Mhm.
anybody use Time Machine?
Yeah.
It's
Um,
built into the Mac?
Mark
Time
Bernstein.
Machine's rock solid. It's great.
Yep.
But with that, you have to have you have to have your external drive and have it connected and always running. And
That's true. Or
Not
we use
necessarily.
network addressable storage, which is what I do.
yeah.
I may
Sorry,
be
Mark.
I may be mistaken, but it seems to me that even if you aren't keeping backups formally, the version history is accessible, I presume, through Time Machine. Uh, I mean, they've got to be accessible somehow. What does the utterly naive user who hasn't discovered Time Machine do to get at backups?
Well, for Time Machine, you click on the Time Machine application, and it'll open up a window, and you'll see a stack of backups, and you can scroll forward and backwards until you find the one you want and have it restore that.
One
You do
challenge with
restore
Time
it.
Machine, though, at first sort of encounter is that, of course, it shows you the file. So you're thinking of, when did I delete note X from my map? You open Time Machine and you see find a folder with your document in and the Time Machine strand. Of course, it's not showing you the thing you're trying to resolve. So this is not to disparage it at all, but that's an extra thing to take on board.
But don't you have that problem with all backup systems?
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm sort of reflecting on the 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 gap between what the technology can reasonably do and what the human mind just presupposes, because we probably assume that, well, someone said, "Oh, well, you can go to time machine, just see it." You might assume that you would see a copy of your, for instance, if you let's say you're working in a map view, that you would see your map view shown through time, and that is all I'm saying is that's not quite what happens, for obvious reasons. But it's something to bear in mind. So there's a little bit of extra work. So in reality, what you might need to do is go back, try something, which means that therefore, sensibly, what you probably want to do is, when it says, "Do you want to overwrite the existing version with the old one, or have them both?" You probably want to have both, because Murphy's law dictates that the old version that you chose to recover was too far back or not far enough back for what you want.
Coming back to the comments that Michael made about ARQ versus Time Machine, I've been a user of ARQ for ARC for at least 15 years. The big difference is that ARC is capable of working across platforms. So if you have a situation where you want to do backups of your Mac OS system, and you've got a Windows system you want to back up, and a few other things, it will work on all those various platforms, Linux. And so you can have one set of backups for all of your different hosts. If you have virtual machines that you're using, again, it can be a nice way to back up either the virtual machine itself or the contents of the virtual machine. The other big advantage that it offers is it allows you to use a standard S3 bucket out on a cloud service, so that you can back up directly to a third-party offsite service. And there are many of them that you can access I use Wasabi because it's pretty cost effective. And so there you've got your backups and fully encrypted before it leaves your system and stays encrypted in the cloud and until you pull it back down where it gets decrypted on your system. So, those are some differences. But, if you're just in a Mac OS environment, then Time Machine is probably your best friend.
And again, it depends on if your time machine, but if you travel a lot, then that's where like Arc is really helpful because anytime you're connected to Wi-Fi, you're backing up. Whereas if you're got a time machine sitting on your desk at home, it's not going to do a hell of a lot of good for you.
Correct.
Just a question related to that. When you do pull your backup, do you have to rename your current Tinderbox file or to avoid rewriting, or will it produce it as an alternative name?
Well, no, you have the risk of, well, like an ARC, you can say overwrite existing file, put it in a different place. For me, because I know I'm doing it for a specific reason, like crap, I just deleted 40 notes that I didn't want to delete, per your example. I actually do that probably at least once a month. I stick it on my hard drive. I rename the backup file to like old whatever because I know I'm going to delete it in the next 5 minutes. And then I open up that old file, grab the notes that I wanted to recover, paste them back into into my Tinderbox file, and then delete the recovered file.
I also use Git, or you can use any version control system in addition, to take snapshots in addition to whatever Time Machine does.
Yeah, and how well does Git work with Tinderbox? I've never really tried it.
Well, once a text file you got there, and you just periodically, committing it to the repository, the Git repository, and it's essentially snapshots the Tinderbox file at that point in time.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I certainly got an education.
I've never successfully gotten Git. I've never used it successfully yet, but I'll try that. Okay. Anybody else? What other what you thought was a simple question led to a great discussion, Bruce. All right. Who else is working on different projects? Or thoughts they want to discuss today? Just capturing the notes from the list as we speak. Anybody else have anything else? If not, Bruce, if you want, I can demonstrate. Here's a question for Erwin. Erwin question, does Tinderbox support the typical Mac OS document version?
Yes.
What can you explain what that is, Mark?
The autosave mechanism in Mac OS preserves old copies of everything you do in most applications, including Tinderbox. There is a known problem with revert in that it's quite tricky to actually stop everything in a Tinderbox document, keep it stopped without unbuilding the document, and then replace it with a new Tinderbox document and start up all the various asynchronous processes attached. And so, as Michael observed, there is a tendency when you revert to sometimes crash. It's regrettable, but you can just use Time Machine to get the same version and it's fine.
Right.
And those are and both Time Machine and Revert are using the same typical Mac OS document versioning system.
Great. Okay. So Bruce, it's not it's a everybody's got that problem issue, not just you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Would you like to see an example of the installer now that Chuck's explained his comments? Would you like to see an example of the installer ideas that we're thinking about so you can actually see it in action?
It's
Or
actually a different question. Would you like to
okay.
show us the installer?
I mean, I can do anything. Not necessarily. I've shown it before. So no
Um,
need.
Truthfully, it doesn't, it wouldn't
Doesn't
mean
matter. That's fine.
that much to me at the
All
moment.
right.
But
Perfect.
I know how you are with your toys.
No need. No need. Got a lot going on. Just want to keep the conversation going. Peter, what's up? What's on your mind? You were always up for interesting topics.
Well, I've been looking at coming up with an alternate notation to be able to automate Tinderbox actions. What I want to have is one line, so I can go through with the stream processor, and each line could correspond to creating a link, creating a note, creating an agent, changing an attribute on something. And then I could leverage that to come up with a whole alternate syntax for taking note taking in a linear stream so that I could parse that, then generate all of these one-line directives to Tinderbox, then have Tinderbox go and build out all of the links, agents, and structure for the site. But when I'm in authoring mode, I could just be putting in a terse notation describing in one flat, highly nested batch of text what it is that I want to have created at the end of the day. So I could be inside of one note, then I could say link to another note, embed the content of the other note at that point, and get really, really deeply recursive there, and then parse that and turn it into, again, a sequence of one-line directives. Then I can step through the one-line directives to execute the action code to actually create the final structure.
Okay. And I don't know if I heard a question or comment there. What's the, if any?
Well, just that's what I'm currently working on.
Nice.
In a couple of weeks, I'll have something I can show you. We'll see how it plays
Fun.
out.
That's an interesting idea.
Does that in any way parallel what Jupyter notebooks do? I mean, is it similar in concept?
Not really. I mean, I'm like actually thinking having a library book in front of me and just trying to go through in a single note and take all the notes out in one sort of a stream of consciousness flow and then go through afterwards and turn that into the full Tinderbox website rendition of it rather than having to stop along the way and okay, now I'm mentioning someone, so I'm going to create a new instance of person. Now there's a new idea. I'm going to create a new idea note. And that's just very, very slow relative to just wanting to go through and again take a stream of consciousness text flow that can get parsed after the fact and then turned into the Tinderbox equivalent of the implicit structure.
Okay.
So it's like accumulating all the commands and then piping them in if you like.
Exactly.
So presumably this is sort of, I know that the word gets perhaps overused, but this is about flow state. So you don't want to lose your train of thought. So you're looking at document X, you're commenting, you're looking at something, you're doing something about it, and you don't want to be distracted by the actual mechanics of the tool that you then need to send something to, which in this case is Tinderbox. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going.
Yeah, it's easy for me to get distracted by all the cool stuff in Tinderbox, which interrupts, which prevents you from getting into a flow state.
Oh, so if anyone has any thoughts on what they'd like the notation to look like to be defining that, any input would be appreciated. So again, the notion is I'm in one note, I want to describe embedding a note off to another note, then I want to be able to work for a while on that note, then back out and be right where I was, all within the text of only a single note. And then I can go through and massage that afterwards and tease out as much as I want.
So in a sense, it's like you're writing a program that each individual statement is either creates a note, sets the text of a particular note, creates a link between something else.
Right. Well, there'd be two languages. There'd be a note-taking language, and that would be the syntax that you use in the stream of consciousness flow to
Yeah.
just spew in all the notes as you're seeing them in the physical source that you have alongside of your Mac while you're typing in the notes. And then that would generate that would be parsed by an outside program and generate the, let's see, I guess a Tinderbox definition language file, which would consist of single line directives, each directive of which would be instructing Tinderbox when it's parsed by Tinderbox's stream parser to create a link, change an attribute, add a note, or add an agent.
I'm going to suggest you might want to split that into two parts. The one problem otherwise you hit is that the thing you just want to do is to say, oh, I know what I need to do. I just need this really gnarly regex, and I'll just put this in my plain text written, one line thing. And essentially it's you run out of escape characters. So because most of the things you want to do probably are actually more quotidian. You just want to say, right, I want to make this textual, I want to make this textual gloss about the thing I'm looking at. And only a smaller number of cases, probably at the point of execution, where you said, take this stuff, do this with it, might you need to have a language that's, or a mechanism that's more descriptive. So I would probably try and corral the points where you might want to do something like write a Tinderbox query in this sort of notation form into one small corner. Otherwise, you trip up. I mean, early on, but knowing no better, I happened to do some research, and I was taking a whole lot of notes about scientific papers. And scientific authors, bless them, love to use things like regular expression, special characters as part of the titles of their documents. Hilarity ensued. Strange things I didn't expect happened. Queries didn't work as I expected, for reasons I understood after the fact. But the lesson I took from it is, okay, you want to be really quite careful where you use these things, because I'm assuming that you want to work through plain text, because
right.
Exactly. So therefore, I think it's worth probably gating off or having some kind of special notation to say, okay, now I'm in a different concept space where there's something more nuance going on. It's not going to happen very often, which is why I put in a box in the corner, rather than everything you have to do, you have to write the thing of, oh, did I write something that's ambiguous? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, the one approach I'm taking is I'm using mismatched delimiters that wouldn't appear in any existing programming language. So I'll have, like a opening angle brace immediately followed by a closed paren, which isn't going to be valid in anything. So that should work as a meta syntax that won't accidentally get clobbered, hopefully, unless someone else is thinking along my lines. Oh, and a completely unrelated question. Has anyone tried feeding a TB ref into an AI and then using it in agent mode to be working with Tinderbox?
Sorry, can you say that again? That was a little fast for me.
Okay, has anyone tried feeding a TB-ref file into a local large language model AI and then querying that to get help while working in Tinderbox?
Yeah, there was a meetup on that about 6 weeks ago. And that's with a fairly general mechanism that will work with desktop Claude, among other things.
So how to handle the TB-ref file? Did you give actual decent Tinderbox advice?
My impression is that at least it had digested significant chunks of it. And I don't think there's a scale problem.
I don't think there was a scale problem. I think there was a competence problem. What was interesting is you got back. This is the problem with the weakness of the whole sort of chat conversational AI thing, is that you get back something that looks coherent. The problem is if you didn't know what the correct if you don't know what the correct answer is, you have no way of telling which of the many things you get told are correct. And I do remember that it's probably somewhere in the forum, and it's a really interesting thing. But my reaction, I mean, because as the author, I have a reasonable sense of what's in there. I'm thinking, no, I don't think I wrote that. But the way it was recited back was if I didn't have that knowledge, I might reasonably think that something that was patently wrong was right, which isn't by way of saying that it's all wrong, but there is an issue. I've just put an interesting link in the sidebar that forgive me, I forget where it came from. It actually happens to be someone reflecting on using AI in a computer science teaching course. But the much more interesting thing is a marvelous phrase, the illusion of competence. Is you use these automated things and you think you understand stuff and you just don't. So what you actually do is just copy paste whatever's in the output box. And it's how to de-skill yourself fast. And again, I don't say that as a canard against AI as a whole, which has many very useful and very and helpful and beneficial sides. But in terms of the general thing of let's just feed it into that. Now, I suppose if I could claim my brain as the author of the same document and offer it as an AI, maybe it will work. But I do wonder partly because I think with something like since we mentioned ATV-ref, which is broadly, I guess, a knowledge base if it fits in anything, is that its meaning is quite contextualized. It's not being read. It's not being written rather to answer any question at any time. The supposition broadly is you're trying to understand something, be it a menu or a sort of function in there, to get sufficient understanding to move ahead in what you're doing. And so therefore, if you just feed it into a general sort of probabilistic engine, it doesn't necessarily give you meaningful output. So I probably digress there, but the answer is yes, somebody has tried it, and the output was interesting. It was the thing I will say is it was coherent, but that's also its weakness.
And it was often right. The frustrating part is sometimes it just made stuff up. And I think it was, but that was like step 7 of a 9-part sequence. And, it did remarkably well. What I think I am gravitating towards is actually relying on things like Claude or ChatGPT more for initial guesses when I know there's a backstop. I've been chasing down a lot of citations. I think I'm up to 70 so far for a paper I'm working on. And sometimes there's like, I remember a short story which had a title, "And the Aliens Knew Like I Mean Everything." I don't remember the author. I thought I'd remembered the right anthology, but I didn't remember the anthology. This is a really bad Google query because every word is common, and I've got some of those words wrong. But in fact, it came up with the author. And of course, I then plugged the author into Science Fiction Encyclopedia, and now I've got it. Because yes, it's a real author. He really did write this thing. He even won an award. I know it's fine. So I'm completely backstopped. There's a wonderful story I believe Dave Rogers is at the center of, where I asked the community to find a old computer human interaction paper on a topic that I actually could describe quite in great detail, but I didn't remember who the authors or what the conference was. I'd spent the morning going through old paper proceedings and I couldn't locate it. I even knew the affiliations of the authors. And but Google was useless. So I thought I'd just ask a bunch of people and someone would remember the paper. It was good paper. Uh, Dave Rogers tried ChatGPT and it came up with a detailed citation, which he sent me. And I said, damn, I actually looked at that proceedings. And then 15 minutes later, I said, I'm looking at the proceedings and paper isn't in it. He says, yeah, I figured that out. And in fact, it was a completely invented paper, but one of the authors struck a little chord in memory. And so I wrote to Bill Gaver and said, the AI thinks you wrote this paper, which does not exist. But did you write a paper like this? Says, oh yes, here it is.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
So uh, situations where you can use its insight, but you have a backstop. So if it doesn't know what it's talking about, you'll find out immediately.
All right. What other projects are people working on? Anything? All right. Well, we can always end a little bit early. We got about 13 minutes left. If we don't need to beat ourselves. We can get back to our Sunday.
Great.
All right, everybody.
Warm
Well, thank you
Sunday.
yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot. Have a great week.
Hi, everyone.
Bye bye.